Welcome to Boswell Book Company. I'm the proprietor, Daniel Golden. It is day 4,340 of us being in business. And Nancy Johnson's debut, The Kindest Lie, is already making waves, winning wonderful reviews across the country. It is a lovely book about finding your past and coming to terms with it in a way. It was introduced to me by another author. So I just want you to know, when you recommend books to me, I often take your advice and read them. And what I am so grateful for that. And I am also incredibly grateful that tonight we have a very special conversation partner, Shannon Sims, anchor at TMJ4. She's actually doing this between newscasts. I can't believe it. She makes me feel like a slug, I'm just saying. And I just want to say two things that I really love about both authors. One, I've been writing that Nancy Johnson was had a career in news before she was working corporate America, and I didn't even realize that one of her gigs was in Madison. I'm going to go and watch her interview after this. And I'm also thrilled to say that Shannon Sims was actually trained as a classical musician. And we're not getting to hear her sing tonight, but maybe so. That's all I have to say. Let's give them both a big hand. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much for joining us.
Daniel, I appreciate the accolades. Nancy, I'm so excited to have this conversation with you because this book, girl, I'm just gonna ask you to read, if you would, first,
Sure.
a portion to give our listeners kind of an idea of what they can expect, and then let's get into it.
Sounds good. Thank you for doing this, first of all, Shannon. I really appreciate it. So I'm going to read a portion from the beginning of the book. So I open the book on election night when Barack Obama is being elected. And so the main character, Ruth Tuttle, she's the successful Ivy League educated Black engineer, and she's with her husband, and they've invited friends over for an election night watch party. And I'll read you a portion at the point where Obama has already been declared the winner of the presidency. Her whole life, Ruth hadn't dared to believe this could happen, and she almost forgot to breathe. A picture of the little house where she grew up in Ganton came to mind. Its low ceilings and narrow hallways, Mama at the kitchen table counting money on the first of the month, Papa's body quivering underneath his plant uniform as he tried to walk straight in the early days of his illness. Maybe, just maybe, everything they'd all been through had been for this, to get here, to this moment, to this man with the funny name, to this day in history. Xavier whooped and gave her a ball drop New Year's Eve style kiss. The townhouse vibrated with their jubilation. Guests lifted their glasses and their voices in a toast to their own manifest destiny. And out of the corner of her eye, she saw Harvey, who was usually the loudest in any room, rocking quietly in a chair with his folded hands pressed against his lips. Then they rolled up the living room rug to do stepper sets and slides, with Xavier breakdancing like he was 13 instead of 32. Somehow she needed to store every part of this moment, burn it into her being so it would still be real when she lived it again as memory. She wanted to scoop up the feeling, bottle it, and tighten the cap so none could seep out ever. But at the same time, her instincts told her to share it. So she opened the windows to give the neighborhood a contact high. Keeping it old school, the Gap Band's Outstanding blasted from the speakers, and they took turns strutting down the Soul Train line. Xavier's breath warmed Ruth's neck, and from behind, he wrapped his arms around her waist, and they rocked gently to the beat. With his wife at home, Harvey managed to slide into a dance sandwich between Penelope and Tess, who always humored the old man. Their feet felt light, and their chests too, the weight of wait your turn, not so fast, and never, having lifted, at least for one night. Ruth and Xavier ate and danced until the sun poked through the blinds, bathing their townhouse in a groggy afterglow, spotlighting barbecue-stained plates and her high-heel shoes slung in a corner of the room. In the early hours of the morning, Ruth lay on the love seat, the highs still buzzing in her head, Xavier's face inches from hers. She stared at his profile and ran her forefinger down his long nose to his lips, past his chin to his pronounced Adam's apple. His skin tone reminded her of the rich Mississippi soil where Mama was born, with flecks of red and yellow just under the surface. He was prone to faking sleep, and it wasn't until she blew a noisemaker gently in his ear that his lips moved. You think our kid could be president someday? His voice had turned rusty from all the celebrating. This was the first time Xavier had spoken of anything as tangible as an occupation for their not yet born imaginary child. In the morning sun, the thought of babies unmoored her. Aren't you getting ahead of yourself? She said. I don't know, maybe you're right. We have plenty of time to map out that kid's future. He lifted one eyebrow. What I do know, though, is now that we got a Black president, I'm taking chitlins to the office today. After a few seconds of silence, he laughed, and she did too, their heads falling back like dominoes from the force of it. Maybe she laughed a bit too hard in relief that he was no longer talking about children. She poked his side. You are ridiculous. You better leave your chitterlings at home, she said, emphasizing each syllable for effect, at least until the man takes the oath of office. Don't mess around and get your black butt fired now. They stayed like that for hours, giggling softly and smiling at everything and nothing, wrapped in each other's arms, hung over with hope. So the kindest lie I like to say is about family, love, and sacrifice, all of it at the dawn of the Obama era, which you just heard me read, a section there about Obama being elected president. And so the story centers on Ruth Tuttle. She's this Black woman, successful, Ivy League educated engineer, definitely on the come up. She's got this great house and this husband, Xavier, who you just met in that excerpt that I read. And in the story, Ruth is harboring this big secret, though. So everything is going right for her in her life. But the big secret is that she gave birth to a baby when she was just a teenager. And she left her child behind in the dying Indiana factory town where she grew up. And so she decides to go back to her hometown to search for her son. And then when she gets there, that's when she meets and forms this unlikely friendship with this poor young white boy. His nickname is Midnight. And so the two of them then are on this collision course of race and class, and both of their lives are changed forever.
You know, I love the example, the beauty, the struggle of Black love that you show throughout this book. And it really allows the reader to peer into Black culture. Another thing that I enjoyed is how you started the book in the present. Tell me why it was so important when talking about race throughout this book and in this time, for you to start in the present and take us through history, the reader.
Yeah, so I started it with the election of Obama because it was such a time of hope, or for many people in the country. I think no matter what your political persuasion was, or your, or your racial background, I think for a lot of people, they felt like we had achieved something significant by electing a Black president. And that's really what inspired me to write the book, was because there was this palpable hope at that time in America. Yet at the same time, I had so many people saying, oh my goodness, we are now post-racial, now that we've got a Black man in the White House. And I could just tell right away that that wasn't the case from what I was seeing, like on my social media feed back then. I mean, Facebook was just getting going in 2008. And I could just see that level of vitriol in the country. And so I wanted to show this divide between Black and white America and where some of that was coming from. And so that's how I chose the characters of Ruth and Midnight. And I just thought this particular time was just a good time to begin the book. People were going through the recession, the Great Recession at that time. The plants were closing. And I think when you have that kind of economic anxiety, it just exacerbates the racial tension. And so that's why I wanted to start then. And then throughout the book, you go back in time to 1997 when Ruth gives birth, and you learn a little bit more about what life was like beforehand, and then it brings you back into the present, which is 2008.
Right, and even so when you talk about the Great Migration is talked about in the book, and what African Americans faced, what are you hoping that readers take away from the book when learning about a past that many had the privilege not to experience or be educated about?
Yeah, it kind of goes back to that whole thing that we're not post-racial. Because when you look at what was happening in 2008 with racism, there are so many parallels to what was happening, back then, in the 1950s, when I talk about the experience that Mama, Ruth's grandmother had. So it's a really difficult scene there where we talk about what happened,
And we
in
talk about it
Mississippi.
because
We
can we
can.
talk about it because
We
I was
can.
reading that, and I had chills and I had tears because I saw the humanity that these men did not see in a child. And then the decisions that people had to make to exist. And I think that's such a hard thing for some of our, I don't know, how do I say this? For people who are not Black to understand.
That's true.
The
And even when you
reality
are
of how Black people have to live.
Yeah, and even when you are Black, you may not understand what those who came before you have had to endure. And that's Ruth's grandmother, is telling Ruth the story of this to kind of explain a little bit about why she thinks leaving the child behind and why leaving sometimes is the best way, because she and her family had to leave and had to flee because of the racial violence that they endured.
And that was one of the things I loved about your book, Nancy, is because it's present day, and you allow the reader to be in that present where they can relate to most of the people who probably are on this chat were here when Obama became president. And so they know what that feeling was, that point in history. But then you also give a history lesson without knowing it.
Right.
When you have Mama tell, Ms. Ernestine tell about Alonzo and what happened to her and what the family had to do to survive. And I think that's that part where whether you're white or Black in this book, with the juxtaposition of Midnight's family and Ruth's family, is that they're experiencing some of the same things. Poverty does not discriminate.
No, it does not. It does not. And that was the beauty of showing these two people. So my first iteration of this book, Midnight, was Black. But then I thought, I want to talk about this racial divide and how Black and white America are seeing things and experiencing this economic scarcity. And so I thought, why not show it through the perspective of a Black woman and a white boy? And on the face of it, they're both very different. Obviously there's a difference in age and race and gender, but yet they each had this need for family connection, and they both are from families where they're just trying to make it and trying to survive in a really difficult time in the nation's history. And so that's a commonality that they had. So I liked showing the differences, but also what they had in common and what was really uniting them. And also just thinking about race and class, that was something else I wanted to explore through these two characters. Like, you've got Ruth, who now is living this upper middle class lifestyle as an engineer. Her husband's a marketing executive at Pepsi. They've got a nice townhouse, so things are seemingly good for them. Yet we show her on her job, and she's not getting the promotions that she deserves, or she believes she deserves, not getting the best assignments. So she's still dealing with racism. And then there's a scene pretty early in the book where she and her husband Xavier are on the L train, and there's this white cop hassling a young Black boy who's drumming there on the train, and nothing has really happened yet per se. There hasn't been any violence or anything, no crime committed, yet they tense up, in fear of what could happen. And that's just something I wanted to show, that Black people in America, we walk through the world living with that kind of fear at all times, not knowing what's going to happen next. And so that's one piece with Ruth. And then with Midnight, he's in a more of an impoverished situation. His dad is out of work, because the plant has closed. And so life is difficult for him, for sure. But yet he's still a white boy, and there's privilege that comes with being a white boy. And he's able to move through the world and move through that community in ways that his Black friends can't. And so I was just interested in showing some of the nuances of that.
And you also talk about the American dream and the roadmap to the American dream. It still seemed that to get out of poverty is education, because for Ruth, she was the one who was educated and left her impoverished town to achieve what she's achieved in Chicago. And she kind of sees that glimmer of hope in Midnight by his desire to wanting to be a microbiologist.
Yeah.
But let's talk about the sacrifice your book touches on of what how to achieve the American dream, and does everyone win?
Right, right. That's so true. And do you have to leave your past behind? Do you have to leave your community behind? Because that's really what Ruth does. Because again, like we talked about, Mama, has said sometimes leaving is the best way, and she really, well, more than encourages, Ruth to both Ruth and Eli. That Eli is Ruth's brother. They put a lot of pressure on her to leave her son behind so that she can fulfill her dream of going to Yale and becoming this engineer. And it's like the whole family and Papa, who's no longer with them, that's the grandfather, but it's like that whole family has been preparing Ruth for this, for this upward mobility and for the American dream and the pursuit of it. But she's torn, when she's giving birth. Ruth is torn. She doesn't know what the right decision is, whether she should hold on to her baby. For one thing, it's a part of the boy that she loved, but, should she hold on to this baby, or should she walk away? And because part of her does want to just escape this town, because it's a small dead end town to her, and she wants to move on from it. But then when she moves on, she's still pulled back into her past. And I think she feels like she can move on from it, but she's still tethered to it in so many ways. And I was thinking about a scene early in the book with Xavier, where they talk about the differences. You were talking about Black love, but the differences in their socioeconomic background. I mean, because Xavier comes from, he started out in a pretty solidly middle class or upper middle class,
bougie family.
Bougie family. Exactly. And so, but yet her pursuit of the dream and leaving, her hometown behind, that's still with her, because she says to him, why is it that you tell people that I'm from Indianapolis and not Ganton? And he's like, well, obviously, because people have heard of Indianapolis. Ganton's a smaller town, He didn't mean anything by it, but there's still something inside her that's saying, maybe I'm not good enough, and maybe you don't think I'm good enough either, because you won't even tell people that I'm from this small town, Yeah. And so those are just all some of the complexities, I think, of trying to pursue the American dream and yet still being so connected to your roots and where you're from.
And even as I know you said, this book is really about examining race and class, the complexity of these characters, I felt that surpasses all of those things, right? Because race is a social construct. Socioeconomics, that is something that, again, is created. But I was just here for Ruth as she was going through every moment. I was here for her because I could understand, I could feel, I had empathy for her when she was, sitting there, and you have this husband who's ready to have a child, to create a family, who wants to do this with you, wants to make this family happen. And you have this secret that you think he will not accept you for. And you got to speak it. You got to speak your truth, right?
You do.
And it was just so palatable, I should say, as she was there saying what she said and getting it out, and his response, and then how they just went from day to day with it, and I just loved how you were just so in tune with the humanness of each one of these characters. Where did these people come in your mind?
I know. I don't know. I just imagine them. I feel they're not based on any particular person. I think somebody asked in the comments too. Yes. I saw, whether this is based on family members. And no. I think there's a piece of me in different ones of these characters. Certainly parts of Ruth, I can relate to. Of course, I have not had a baby yet. I don't have any children actually, but I was still able to identify what it must be like to be a mother. I mean, I am a daughter. And so I pull on, some of those experiences, and being a Black professional and walking in two worlds, that kind of dual identity that so many of us have to live with. I brought that to the character of Ruth. And the others, I think, are just composites of people I've known, or, snatches of conversation I've heard from folks. Midnight, people usually think that, that he would probably have been one of the most difficult characters to write, since I'm, I've never been white and I've never been a boy, but I have been 11 years old. And when I was a kid, I was teased a lot, bullied quite extensively. And so I brought some of that feeling, from my childhood, and gave that to Midnight, because I understood what it was like to stand on the outside of things and to be really wanting acceptance and belonging and to just hunger for that. And so, so I think I bring parts of myself to each of the characters.
So let's talk about this one scene where Midnight is perplexed about feeling wanted and feeling loved from his father. And this is when he has experienced being jumped by the other young men after he protected his friend Corey. Mm-hmm. And his mom has already passed away. And so he's kind of like this young, like you said, this 11-year-old boy who's trying to find his place, right? And trying to be loved. But when we talk about, it's amazing how fear can fuel our ideas of different races of people. But his father was wrapping his arm with gauze, and he had said to him, "I forgive you." It was absolution that Midnight hadn't asked for. But it's okay, son. You're still young. You didn't know any better. And then he said, "You didn't have a clue. You were fighting on the wrong side of the war." The war. So when he said war, I'm still going back like, are we going back to the Civil War on this?
You're like, what war is this? That's the war that many, I think that's the war that many some in America feel that they're fighting now. It's that culture war, and that's the war that some, I think, in white America are fighting because they're seeing the changing demographics, the browning of America, and so they are struggling. At least Butch, boy, that's Midnight's father, is struggling to hold on to a piece of his identity. As a white person in America, he sees a lot slipping away. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that he's lost his job at the plant, because so many people in that town are so connected to the plant because that's their livelihood. That's how they feed their families, and their identity is very wrapped up in the work that they do. And now that he's lost that, it's like, that's, and he's had a few times where he has been out of work. So, later on he loses a job, but so it's not the most recent one, but he had other times where that was kind of a tenuous situation for him, whether he was going to have a job or not. And so, so he's just dealing with that. And I think that's what he's saying to Midnight. He's, saying, really stick with us, like we need that solidarity, in the white community. And I think that's where some of that fighting was going on, in the community with some of the boys in the town and the kids. And I think that's another thing I wanted to show, that the children are watching us and they see and pick up on so much of what we say and do and what our perceptions are about race in America. And so Midnight, he's still very innocent, and so he's confused. He doesn't really understand what his father is saying, but he knows innately he wants his father's acceptance. Right. Throughout the book, you see that he's really hungry for his father to accept him and to say, "You're doing a good job and that I'm proud of you." He wants to show strength to his father because he knows his father respects that.
But then he sees his grandmother, who has this friendship with Ma for years, right? Knows Ruth, doesn't see things the same way his father sees things. And even when you mentioned that, it's the scarcity mindset, because it wasn't as if there were Black people in Ganton who were taking the jobs at the plant. No. Everybody lost their job.
Everybody lost it, right.
So this idea, and again, it's brought up in the book, and it's just, that conversation you have is, where does this scarcity mindset come from that creates and breeds fear for people who look different than you,
Right.
yet have no aim to take anything from you, but to have the same as you have been afforded. This is why I don't understand racism.
I know.
And
And
I'm being very facetious by that, saying that.
right. No, I know what you're saying.
Because there is no sense, if you come from a space of lack, then yes, you're always going to fear something. And that's how people are able to mobilize more people against another group of people out of fear. But in this book, everybody's in the same boat. You
Right.
know, everyone's in the same boat, other than the fact that you have said white is superior and therefore is better than Black. And so the Black people live on this side of town, the white people live on that side of town. And that's just the way it's been. But no one has ever in the book, no one challenges that, right?
No.
Other than how you see it's challenged in the mind of Midnight and Ruth and their relationship.
And their relationship. That's so true. And I haven't read her book yet, but Isabel Wilkerson wrote the book Cast. And
I'm reading it now.
Are you reading it now? And I've been hearing that it kind of addresses some of that in terms of what the roots of some of those differences are. And I would think just how different groups are pitted against each other, you know, in this caste type system, you know, and that's what I think is happening, you know, between Black and white America, that, you know, each group, and even within the white groups, you know, in history, there are always different ones. One has to be above the other, and somebody has to be below you, you know, and it's just that throughout history, you know, with our 400 plus year legacy of, you know, slavery since 1619, I mean, Black people have been the ones at that bottom, you know, and like I said before, with the changing demographics and seeing, you know, that we're starting to have more Black and brown people in the country, I think there's some of that fear, you know, starts to surface. You know, am I going to lose something? And I think part of Butch's mentality is if you and your family are getting ahead, that's probably going to mean less for me and for mine. And as irrational as that may be, that's the mindset for some people. And I think particularly for him in this book.
And so when you talk about that, I mean, and then add on the layer of socioeconomics, right? And African Americans in the book, you know, as you had that conversation between Xavier and Ruth and her feeling a sense of not feeling worthy enough all the time with his family. And
yeah, they're like the Jack and Jill type, you know,
Jack and Jill
family and the links and the, you know, just all the stuff, you know.
And then he breaks it down like we're as simple as it comes as well, you know.
Right. And then he got in trouble talking about some of the things that he had to do as a kid, you know, and they're like, no, you weren't poor. Like,
right. I mean, you talk about, you know, let's have conversation. How do you think, what is best for readers to have a conversation after and while reading this book? Because I think it's important to discuss many of the different facets that you bring up.
I do think so. Because I'm always thinking about last year with all the racial violence that we saw with the killing of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery. And you had so many in white America starting their anti-racism reading. And much of that was nonfiction, you know, and which is fine. But I think there's a power in a novel like The Kindest Lie to get people talking, because I think you can build empathy that way. And it's less threatening, I think, for some people than to read a book that kind of outlines, okay, here's what racism is about, you know, check your white privilege. Because then, as I know, I see it with people I, you know, interact with all the time, because they're like, oh, not me. You know, that was something maybe that my great grandfather may have done, or, you know, somebody in the history books did, but this really has nothing to do with me. You know what I mean? But I think when you see this, you know, in a more contemporary novel, you could understand it better, because we're not talking about you or your grandfather or your, you know, mother. We're talking about Ruth and Midnight and what's happening in their lives. And people can really relate to it through the story and the characters, and they can walk in the shoes of these characters and identify with it more strongly that way. And so I think that's the key.
So true, Nancy. And I really appreciated you for taking us on that journey, because again, as you said, there's a lot of times, especially currently, as we all are having to reconcile with our own space,
Mhm.
where we stand in this world and how we will stand in this world. I love again how you put it in a book, as you said, in a fiction book, but you bring some very nonfiction realities, facts to the conversation to allow people into this world to hopefully gain some sense of empathy. I know one thing that Daniel told me when I first met him about books. He said books are like windows and they allow you in to see others. And it's only if we open our eyes and our hearts to these characters and these other worlds can we grow some sense of empathy and have a better understanding of the world. I'm just so appreciative of what you have written here. It is a beautiful testimony.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And then I also, I've been talking about, or we've been talking about race in class in this conversation, but I've had some readers who have told me how much they connected with the book and they don't even mention race in class. For them, it's about motherhood or it's about sacrifice, and there are people who are like, oh, I really get into the sibling relationship between Ruth and Eli. And
privilege though. I think that's
privilege.
so
That could be, but I'm like, yeah, people seem to come to it with their own life experiences and different things resonate with them. For me, it's really a lot about the race and the class piece. But yeah, I see people, but that's interesting. I'd never heard anybody mention. That's interesting, that privilege piece that you bring up, that sometimes people are in a situation or in a life experience where they're not forced to see it. You know what I mean?
Yes. And that's not to put anyone down. It's just we just have to check it at the door. I think we all have some sense of privilege. We've had some more than others, but we are privileged to acknowledge it or not to acknowledge it.
That's
One
true.
one of our guests who are listening into our conversation asks, where did the title come from?
Oh, yes. So The Kindest Lie, this was the second title I had. Originally, I was in some writing workshops and I'd come up with Until Midnight was a title that I had. But I had Laura Lippman, who's an author, a well-known author. She was an instructor for me in a writing workshop and she gave me some good advice. She's like, no. She said, you never want to use a name of your character to be in service of your title. And that's what I was doing because I had a character named Midnight. So I was like, oh, Until Midnight, or, and so, but I think The Kindest Lie works a lot better. So The Kindest Lie was my second title. And I kept thinking the entire time, are the publishers going to change the title? So I was holding my breath and they never did. But it works on several levels. One, The Kindest Lie is really about the lies that we tell to protect the people we love, the lies we tell with the best of intentions. And that's what we see Ruth doing in the book, lying really so that she can survive and go on and achieve, her version of the American dream. Her grandmother, Mama, certainly, when you read the book, you'll find out about some of the lies that she's told. But most of those lies were because she wanted the best for her granddaughter and for her grandson. She wanted them to have something better than what she had. And so she lies for those reasons. But then the title also works, I think, on a macro level for me, because it's also the lie that America has told itself about how decent and honorable it is as a country. So that was the other way that I think The Kindest Lie works.
Well, I thought that it was, and you talked about it like very early in the books, like chapter 1 or 2, you give the title away. And it's funny because you also question as the reader, how do I say this? When is a lie an okay lie, right? Because it had ramifications.
Right. There are all these ripple effects on all these people's lives throughout the book, So I don't make any judgment about whether the lies are good or bad. So I'll leave that up to the reader to decide. But it's interesting when you mentioned giving something away, because in the very first, I think it's the first paragraph, certainly on the first page, I tell the reader what the big secret is or the big lie is. I let you know that Ruth had a baby, when she was 17 and that she left her baby behind in her hometown. And I learned a lot from reading Toni Morrison, who's one of my great influences. And one of my favorite books is The Bluest Eye. And in and I still think about Piccola Breedlove all the time, her main character. But in that book, and this is what I picked up from Toni Morrison's storytelling, in that book, on the first page, you learn that Piccola Breedlove had a baby by her father, that she was, molested by her father and, and had a child by him. And Toni Morrison tells you that's what happened, but I'm going to spend the rest of the book telling you how this came to be.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same thing with my book. I'm telling you what Ruth's big secret is. And the rest of the book, you're going to learn what the impact of that secret is, not only on her, but on the lives of the other characters in the book.
How did you make the transition? Because we both, as Daniel said, both have journalism backgrounds.
Yeah.
What was it about writing a novel you had to get out? Where was that click of, I'm going to write a novel?
I'm going to write a novel. I've always loved writing and storytelling, and I grew up as an only child on the south side of Chicago. And so for me, I was always making up stories, and, I'd come home, with my parents, come home from the grocery store, I would act out everything. I was the grocery store clerk. I was the person shopping. I played all these roles. And so I always had a vivid imagination. And then I think in news, I was still able to tell stories. And I love that, mainly love the human interest type stories. Those were my favorite. And I think one reason I left news was because I'd be on one of these feature stories that I loved. And then back then, because I'm older, the pager would go off, and you'd hear the police fire scanners. And then I have to go to a triple homicide a few counties over and cover that, because I was a general assignment reporter for 11 years. And so I got tired of doing that. I wanted to tell the stories that I wanted to tell, and the stories that were born of my own imagination, not just the ones that were making news. And so that's when it got in my head that I wanted to do this. But I also knew I'm single, so I don't have another source of income. I had to eat. So I had to do other work. So it's not like I could say, oh, I'm leaving news and now I'm going to be a novelist.
Yes.
So, so I worked in public relations, corporate communications. I still do that all these years later. And, but I always knew that I wanted to write a novel, and to tell the stories I wanted to tell. But I learned so much though from journalism, I think, that informed the novel writing. For one thing, just the curiosity about people. And also, when I'm as a reporter, I could be telling a story about tax policy or education or whatever it is, big issues, but I always had to tell it through the lens of one person or one family, as you know. We have to personalize it, put a human face on it for people to relate to the story. And I do the same thing with writing a novel. I'm talking, as we said, about big issues like race and class and motherhood, but I'm telling you the story of that through the lens of Ruth and Midnight. So that's really what I think the journalism has done to inform my fiction writing.
Especially with the details. I could tell that you were very detail oriented in describing different scenes and moods. And, we have the benefit of meeting so many different people, characters, that the average person may never meet, that allows us to have that sense of empathy, right? Because we get to walk in the shoes of someone else as we're trying to tell their story. And I could just see that had to have some influence on how you were writing.
That's so true. Like I grew up in, Chicago, south side of Chicago. I'm a city girl, but when I was reporting in Wisconsin and Madison at WISC, the CBS affiliate, for about 4.5 years. And I mean, I've been on, a lot of dairy farms, talking to farmers and, just seeing a different side of life. And I love that, getting to know these people whose life experiences are so different from my own, and just hearing what life is like for them and getting to know them. And and that's the curiosity I'm talking about that I bring to the story. And then you were talking about just the language. Excuse me, when I'm writing my narrative, I go back to my manuscript from the day before and I will read it aloud. And I listen to how it sounds. And that's the other piece from broadcast journalism too, is that we are writing for the ear, and so I listen, how does it sound? What's the rhythm, the cadence of the language? And so that's something that I do in my fiction writing as well. The negative side is because I come from a news background, I'm used to writing short, concise. Like, I might have a minute 30 package, or a voiceover sound on tape that I'm doing, maybe, 30 seconds, 45 seconds. And then it was kind of hard for me to write, like 85,000, 100,000 words. It's like, so I felt that I was always like, okay, I'm really done with this now. And I was far from, having a novel length manuscript. So that's the way I had to stretch myself.
Awesome. I want to get a question that Randall Ali has posted. He says, is Ruth lying, or is she merely doing what many Americans do, and that is to gloss over or omit their painful truths?
Yeah, I think there's a fine line between those two, and I think you could say that's definitely the truth. It's kind of one of those lies of omission, really, in terms of not being forthcoming, but also just the part about the lying to yourself. And so I think we do go through life, as you said, glossing over and just pretending, in our own mind that something is not real because we don't have what it takes at the time. We don't think to face it. And so we deny it. And so, yeah, I think that's another apt way to look at it, that maybe it's not a lie, but just a glossing over. And it's a self-protective thing that I think many of us do.
So you mentioned Toni Morrison as one of your favorites, and I'm like, she is like one of the,
like the mother.
Her, Zora Neale Hurston. Who else are your influences as writers and novelists?
Some of my other favorites, Jesmyn Ward, love her. Salvage the Bones is one of my favorite books, written about the Hurricane Katrina and the experience of a Black family there. And she's from that area. She's from Mississippi and, from that kind of poor rural area. And it's really interesting when I think about her life, because I can compare it to Ruth's. So she's this very successful author, who's won, the National Book Award. She's won all the top awards, but yet she still lives in that poor community in Mississippi. And she's like, this is where I want to be. This is where I want to raise my kids. So a very different kind of choice from my character of Ruth, who, became successful or left, I should say, to become successful and then stayed gone, for 11 years. Whereas, Jesmyn Ward is someone who's like, no, I want my children to feel what this is like, to have the entire, extended family around us, even though, they are in one of the more impoverished parts of the country. But anyway, yeah, so I love her storytelling. Jacqueline Woodson is another one that I absolutely love. I love Another Brooklyn and Red at the Bone. And she has a bunch of young adult books as well. That's really, where she's, most known is for her young adult literature. But I just love how she has a background with poetry. And so her work is very lyrical. And I tend to gravitate to some of those books that are more lyrical. And I'm not as lyrical of a writer, of course, as a Jacqueline Woodson, but I'm able to pick up some things from that.
No, it really is. It's an easy read. You get engrossed into the characters. It's a page turner because you're wanting to know how the layers of who Ruth came to be. That, it really made it interesting. I will be honest with you. At first, when Midnight was introduced, I was kind of like, who is this? Wait, where does this fit into?
Like, where does little boy come from?
Right, yeah, where did he come from? But then, as again, you have to wait. Sometimes you have to be patient. Yeah. You see how he plays a role in the storyline, and then you see their connection.
Yeah. Did you find? I said I was going to ask you a question, but here I am asking. Did you find? I've had some people, like, kind of on a critique level. Some people thought that Ruth was selfish. I've heard from some readers that they thought she was selfish to go back and try to uproot things, for her, looking for her son after having been gone so long. Did you find that selfish choice?
I don't think it's a selfish. No, I didn't think it was a selfish choice. Now, I think if anyone wants to put judgment on the selfishness of it, it's what's your plan of action? What did you plan to do? I felt as if she went back with no plan.
Right.
And so not having the plan, then I think could cause or would cause more detriment and harm to a child and the situation
right,
than having a plan, and so I kind of felt like she was running home to right a wrong.
Right.
But I also had empathy for her and understanding for her because she was 17 years old. And I always believed that we're all one decision away from making the wrong decision that would lead us down a road we can't come back from, and it's just by the grace of God.
For the grace of God,
that some of us are able to rebound or make these decisions to walk another way. And so I didn't think she was selfish at all. I just felt that she went not having a plan.
Right.
And when she realized she had to say something to Xavier about this child, I think the reality for her, and I think any woman can relate to that reality, is when she was sitting in the OBGYN room and the IUD had to be removed. And that was her security blanket, right?
Right. Like, as long as that's there, we ain't gonna have no baby. Yeah.
Right? Because I think what she, and how I could relate as a woman, is here she was saying, how could I be so excited to start a family at this point in life and have everything, the perfect situation, and yet no, I left something behind because it wasn't the perfect situation. And had I not, would I be? And so that challenge, that struggle that she had, that's what I immediately connected with, because I'm sure everyone has had that struggle. If you've been living long enough and have experienced life, you've had that struggle and you've come to that place. And so that's where my heart went out to her.
And she knows that Xavier's a good man, and she can imagine him with their child, doing all the things that a father would do. And so she knows she has the right person. So it's not like, oh, I'm married to somebody I wouldn't want to have a baby with anyway, but she knows he would be a good father. But yet she is thinking about who I left behind in my hometown. And she's feeling so much guilt because she's thinking that he might be mired in the very poverty that she managed to escape, and so that weighs on her.
Yeah. And so was she trying to rip him from that? And I think I think the thing that a lot of people can relate to in your book is that face to face with shame.
Yeah. That's so true. So true.
And the realities of the decisions and the lies you tell to suppress the shame you feel. And how do you walk in that?
Right. And it's interesting how you also said that so many of us are like one mistake away, or we're close to our lives going a different direction. And I was thinking about Ruth. She did get the education and she was able to leave that town. And there's so many people who talk about that. Just pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You can make it out. And I was thinking everybody doesn't, make it. You know what I mean? Everybody isn't the success story that Ruth is.
And everybody doesn't have the lift. Right. There's that conversation about nature and nurture.
Right.
It's very clear that there was a nurturing in Ruth's home, and that that even though nature around them had them in poverty, that Ruth was still nurtured. Once they saw the ability in her, they nurtured it. And so again, it's hard for me to read this book in judgment.
No.
Because of the experiences I have as a journalist, meeting people and have met people that I realized, I could have made that decision. If I had made that decision, what would have been different for me than for them? Because my parents would have been the nurturer, despite. But that person might not have had that. And I think that's another thing you bring up in the book when you look at the different relationships between Ruth, Natasha, and Corey and Midnight, just the relationships. People have to have relationships, and sometimes you have to have it with people who don't look like you, who don't always have the same socioeconomics background as you. I think that's how we become.
That's how we grow. Yeah. We grow through that. That's true. And I wonder what would have happened to Ruth if she had come back to her community. You know what I mean? I think about, do you always have to leave it and stay gone? You know what I mean? But, you can also come back and be a fixture in your community and be a role model, all that kind of thing. But again,
I know that's a struggle. That's a struggle. I do.
It is.
But
what do you do? How do you lift up your community? When we leave those kinds of communities behind, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Is it that we're waiting on somebody else to build that community back up. When that's your home, that's your hometown, what's the responsibility that we have to our communities? So I thought about that too.
Yeah, no, that's a good one to think about. I have another person listening in, and they just wanted to say that similar to Celie in The Color Purple by Alice Walker, both characters, Ruth, appear to have holes in their soul because their children are not in their lives. Now, I will say with Celie, it may be a little bit, I felt maybe that's a little bit different because Celie had no love. She had no nurture. No one was feeling Celie, right?
Nobody.
Except her children.
Right.
And again, I've seen that character out here in the streets where women have children simply to have something to love and to be loved.
And to be loved. Yes, yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Whereas Ruth, reconciliation, that's another, I guess, theme in your book.
That is another one. Reconciliation as well as forgiveness is one too that you'll find.
So let me ask you, The Kindest Lie by Nancy Johnson, the first book. Are there more coming?
Are there more coming? I can't say a lot, but yes, there will be more books coming. So I am working about 3 chapters into something new. Also dealing with race, class, and family. So definitely the themes that readers have come to love and appreciate with The Kindest Lie. You'll find those again, but a different time period and totally different story. But that's all I can say about that. But people have to stay tuned to learn more.
And I know, just before we wrap up, I know you said that having the conversation about race and class is something that you hope this book will stir up. But what would you say to the readers who may be a little scared to deal with race and class, but you want them to take a look into the pages of this book?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that gets back to what I was saying before about, there are plenty of people who've come to the book and not even, really dealt with, issues of race and class in this story. But at its heart, it's a family story. I think it's a story with a lot of universality, and you will connect with the story because you will see yourself or someone in your own family, I think, through these characters, through either Ruth's family or Midnight's family. I think there will be something you can identify with. It was beautiful that I heard from a woman on Instagram who said to me, she said, you know what? She said, oh my God, she said, the character of Mama is just like my grandmother, who is Belgian and Jewish. And she said, because she makes hot water cornbread, and she also has a can of bacon drippings on the back of the stove. And she was like, immediately, I was like, oh my God, this is my grandmother. And so I just think that's interesting because it just shows, again, the universality and the commonalities that we all share. And so that's what I would say, is that there is definitely something here in the story in terms of the characters and their experiences that I think people will be able to connect with. And then hopefully once you connect on the level of this being a story about family and love and sacrifice, you can then interrogate some of these other issues that may be a little more difficult to grasp.
Most definitely, Nancy. I've had a great time.
I've had a great time. This was wonderful.
About your debut novel. I hope that the 64 people who have also been listening into this conversation enjoyed what we discussed in The Kindest Lie by Nancy Johnson. Again, it is a page turner. It really is a book that has you questioning not only yourself, what decisions, what choices would you make, but it also has us talking and hopefully having conversations, candid conversations about the way we perceive people and the way we have been perceived. So I hope that if you haven't read it yet, you've gotten the book. We really want you to go to Boswell.
Yes. We really do. Or support your local independent bookstores for sure. And we have signed copies at Boswell. So thank you.
We have book plates. Yes. No, I do want to say that if you really want an actual signed copy, because some people are very picky, Semicolon, a wonderful Black-owned bookstore in Chicago, has signed copies. Don't use the bookshop site though, because those come from Ingram. You have to call them or email them.
Oh, that's good. And I didn't even know that. I didn't know that you had to. Yeah.
You can't do it off the website because they don't fulfill those themselves.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I did go there personally.
Always teach books. So to Shannon Sims, I want to say, journalists make the best novelists. Just a little bug in your ear.
I know. I want a Shannon Sims novel now.
That's right.
I'm gonna read. I'm just gonna keep reading. I can do the 2-minute packages. 340 pages. Yeah, no. I don't know.
No.
And
And somebody
Nancy-
asked if it was my birthday, and it is. So
Yes, to Nancy, I want to say happy
Nancy.
birthday.
oh, thank you. It's a milestone one. I turned 50. So
Hey,
Oh, you did
the
it.
new 30, girl. The new
new
30.
30. I know. It's like they say black don't crack, I guess. So
And I think I think Ruth found that out too with one of her classmates.
right. That's so true.
Thank you both for a wonderful evening. I hope this was a good enough. I hope this was a good present because it was for all of us. Let's just say.
This was wonderful. I appreciate this, Shannon. What a wonderful conversation.
Oh, I'm glad. I'm so glad. I'm so
And
glad.
you gave it such a careful read too. So I appreciate that.
I had to look out.
I know, you were good.
I wanted to say thanks to all the folks who joined in.
Yes, thank
We
you.
wouldn't have a bookstore without you. Tell your friends.
Okay,
Awesome.
Thank you,
Daniel, thank you so
everybody.
much.
Thank
Congratulations,
you.
Nancy.
I
It's really
appreciate
good.
it. Thank you so much.